I want to introduce you to retired Judge James P. Gray of Newport Beach. He served for 25 years as a trial judge in the municipal and superior courts of Orange County. Before becoming a judge, he served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Costa Rica, a staff judge advocate and criminal defense attorney in the Navy JAG Corps, a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, and a civil litigation attorney in private practice. He also ran for Congress on the Republican ticket in 1998 and as a Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate in 2004. Judge Gray has written 2 books, one on the failed war on drugs and one on the art and responsibilities of being a judge in modern America. He holds degrees from both UCLA and USC and has been honored for his distinguished judicial career and his many contributions to American society on a number of fronts. Please welcome Judge James P. Gray.
Thank you. It's certainly nice to be with such good people because I truly believe, based upon my background, my experience, that the issue of drug policy is one of the most critical that is facing our country, if not the world today. I look back over my experience in the United States Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and I held for a short while the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California back in 1978, 75 kilos of heroin, 160 pounds. That was and is a lot of heroin. Does anyone have a concept of what the record prosecution is today in the Central District of California? Well, it's 18 tons of cocaine in one place. When I was a prosecutor, the cost of wholesale kilo of cocaine or heroin was about $25,000. Today it's about half that, about $12,000 to $13,000. The United States of America today leads the world in the incarceration of our people, both by sheer numbers as well as per capita. And here I assure you that we're number one does not make me proud. I was prosecuting these cases. I was defending these cases in the Navy and didn't really give it all that much thought. It seemed like the right thing to do, and I did it full throttle. But once I became a judge, I was appointed in 1983 by Governor Deukmejian to the municipal court, thereafter elevated to the superior court. I just looked at my own experience in my courtroom, and then I started expanding my horizons, reading the articles in the paper, looking at the situation, and just determined that we could do it better. Churning low-level drug offenders through the system was not working. Putting all of these people in jail was not working. And then I started looking around me too and thinking, you know, we're not doing nearly as good a job today in homicide prosecutions as we were before because we're spending such large amounts of resources on low-level drug offenders. Then you look at it even more and you see that, okay, so you read that such and such a big-time drug dealer was arrested and incarcerated and taken out of business. Does it really make any difference? No. You listen to the head of the DEA speak. And these are all government statistics that I'll share with you. The head of the DEA said at any one time, the Mexican drug cartels have warehoused 200 tons of cocaine in Mexico within 3 miles of our border, waiting for a scarcity in Fresno, Kansas City, Boston, wherever, so that they can bring them across. So I started looking at this and determined there's got to be a better way. Now, like you, I have never used any form of illicit substance. I'm just not interested. You could bless marijuana, cocaine, whatever, by every religious leader in town and give it away on the street corner, and I am not going to jam cocaine up my nose. And you're not either. However, if you were, you'd probably be doing it already. These drugs are fully available in today's world in any amount you want based upon price. To the degree that, you're probably not aware, Charles Manson, you know who this guy is, was transferred from Corcoran State Prison about 10 years ago to some other prison facility because he was found to be selling illegal drugs from his prison cell, and he was in solitary confinement. So if you look at it, if we can't even keep these drugs, dangerous as they can be, out of our prisons, for heaven's sake, how do you expect to keep them off the streets of Fresno or any other town or city in our country? You can't. And then you look at it more deeply and you see the truth, which is There has never been a society in the history of mankind that has not had some form of mind-altering, sometimes addicting substance to use, to misuse, to abuse, or even get addicted to, unless the Eskimos would be involved, because they couldn't grow anything, but now the chemistry has changed that as well. So understand, I'm sorry to have to burst the balloon, but these drugs, dangerous as they can be, are here to stay. And if that's the truth, then let's stop moralizing about these things and start managing the problem, recognizing that these drugs will bring harm to our communities. Let's try to take up a program and a policy to reduce that harm. Because, yes, a lot of that harm is drug usage, and we're going to talk about that a bit. No question about it. And I don't mean by anything I say to you good folks today to minimize that difficulty. But there are also two problems that we're facing in our world today. One is drug problems, but the other is drug money problems. And I say without fear of contradiction, the drug money problems are far more serious even than the drug problems themselves. So in April of 1992, 17 years ago, hard as that is to believe, as a sitting judge at the Superior Court in Orange County, California, pretty conservative area, I held a press conference, rare thing to do for a sitting judge, stating my opinion that we have to be able to do it better. In fact, I said, and I believe it, we couldn't do it worse if we tried. So now I have spoken to lots of different groups, and as you can imagine, I've received quite a few introductions, many of which were not quite as generous as Bud gave here. In fact, one of them I remember distinctly. I'll quote it to you verbatim. It was, "I know you all want to hear the latest dope from the courthouse, so here's Judge Gray." But I do discuss this issue. I do not mean in any fashion to exaggerate, to do anything to glamorize any of this. And in fact, if any of you think that anything that I say is untrue or exaggerated, please do me the favor, stand up, wave your arms, not so fast, Gray, and we'll talk about it. Any statistic I give you will be a government statistic. But before I go on, let me ask you, based upon your experience level, your involvement, your perceptions, how many of you here in this room believe that we in the United States of America are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to this critical issue of drug use and abuse and all of the crime and misery that goes with it? I see one hand, Sheriff Payson, whom I respect greatly. But otherwise, you are in agreement with me. We're not making progress. What's the first realization once you realize that fact? And that realization is we have no legitimate expectation of being in better shape next year than we're in today, unless we change our approach. So what should we do as a reasonably caring, intelligent society? Let's look at our options. Let's first of all realize we have options to this, what I call failed and hopeless policy of drug prohibition. I say drug prohibition. We repealed alcohol prohibition. We're still living in prohibitionary times today, and it's drug prohibition. So just because we discuss this, just because we're going to be involved in this discussion for 30 minutes, does not at all mean that we condone drug usage. I don't. I've never used any of these illicit substances, like I said. But people are. And let's recognize that, yes, there are those harms. Now, I'm going to jump forward a little bit because we only have 20 minutes, and I'd like to leave at least the last 5 for questions because that's the most fun thing for me. But right this minute, there is a bill in Sacramento presented by an Assemblyman Tom Amiano from San Francisco, AB 390, and I am openly requesting your support of this measure. It would treat marijuana like alcohol. Journey with me. Walk with me for a minute. What would happen if we in the state of California were to treat marijuana like alcohol? 6 things. The first 5 would transparently be beneficial and immediate, and the 6th we'll talk about thereafter. The first thing that would happen is we as taxpayers in the state of California would literally save $1 billion that now we are spending in a futile effort to eradicate marijuana as well as to prosecute and incarcerate nonviolent marijuana offenders. And you can tell how successful we are in eradicating marijuana by the understanding that marijuana is the largest cash crop today in the state of California. Last year, the Bureau of Narcotics here in California bragged, and rightfully so, that they had a record marijuana seizure in the state. 2.9 million plants in 542 different raids. And you've seen the pictures and the helicopters and all that sort of stuff. They're very expensive. But even so, it was still the largest cash crop in our state last year. So you can tell how successful we are in its eradication. The number two thing that would happen is, when I was at the press conference with Assemblyman Amiano, there was also present a lady named Betty Yee, who was the chair of the State Board of Equalization for the state of California, one of the taxing arms, of course, of our government. And she was there in support of this measure, and she said that her agency computed that we as taxpayers would gain $1.3 billion in revenue by taxing this stuff. So now that is a change of $2.3 billion in our tax deficit in the state of California. You'd think someone would notice. But the third thing trumps the first two. I think we would all agree. Because if we were to treat marijuana like alcohol, we would make marijuana less available for our children than it is today. You ask them, like I do, continually. I go to high school classes, junior college, college classes, and ask those young people under the age of 21, if I were to give you $50 in cash, how many of you could come back by noon tomorrow with $50 worth of marijuana if you wanted to? And 2/3 of them raised their hands. And the other third could, if they wanted to, they just haven't thought about it. It's easier for our young people today to get marijuana than it is a six-pack of beer. Why? That's not what we want. That's not what I want. That's not what you want. But understand, the alcohol is regulated and controlled by the government. And the illegal drugs, the illegal marijuana, is controlled by illegal marijuana dealers, and they don't ask for ID. So as soon as you prohibit this substance, you give up all of your ability to regulate it, control it, involve whatsoever. You also are encouraging, recruiting children to join juvenile gangs. Why? So they too can be a part of the action and sell marijuana. I've been in juvenile court. I have seen this happen time and time again. We might as well take out billboards advertising to our children. You want to make some money? You'll probably never make as much money in anything as you can by selling drugs. And that is a message our children are receiving. And gangs, activity, and funding continues. The fourth thing that would happen, by the way, is really important for you people up here in an agricultural area, because we would, in effect, regain the entire hemp industry. And if you look back through our country's history, you go back to Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, they had their plantations growing hemp. Hemp, by the way, as you probably know, or you should, is the stalk of the marijuana plant. You can get as much of a kick from smoking hemp as you can basically smoking this napkin. I mean, there's nothing there. Also, the seeds of the marijuana plant, however, they can be jerry-rigged now, so they have basically no THC in them whatsoever. But you can reestablish a completely viable industry. You, in fact, can get 4 times the amount of paper pulp from an acre of hemp as you can an acre of trees. Now think about that. 4 times the amount of paper pulp from an acre of hemp as you can an acre of trees. It takes 1 season to grow the hemp, 20 years to grow the trees. We could revitalize areas like the Northwest of the United States of America, where the whole paper pulp industry is now simply basically gone. We could revitalize that. Our merchants here, because hemp still is a fairly decent industry here, but they are penalized by being required to import their raw material hemp from those radical countries like Canada and England, for heaven's sake. Let's revitalize that issue. And the fifth thing, of course, and I could spend a whole bunch of time on this, but the entire medical marijuana problem would go away. By the way, we have the federal government, and they're right. Federal law does trump state law, and I have to follow the law just like anyone else. And the federal government are acting like a bunch of bullies and coming in and arresting truly sick people in a lot of ways. The sixth thing would happen is, yes, let's not be naive here. If you're going to have treating marijuana like alcohol, I would have it done just by the government. I don't want it to be advertised at all. I don't want there to be any problems with age restrictions, etc. But if adults want to use this substance, go ahead. Because when it comes down to it, it makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor, Robert Downey Jr., in jail for his cocaine problem, and he certainly seems to have one, as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. It's a medical issue. That's the same. Is there any difference between Robert Downey Jr. on the one hand and Betty Ford on the other? And the answer is no. Bring them closer to medical professionals that can help them. Instead of labeling them automatic criminals, pushing them farther away, and clogging up our jail cells with them. It doesn't make sense. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle while impaired by any of these drugs, you fill in the blank, marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, bring them to me. Bring them to Chief Pazin. The criminal justice system is well equipped to hold people accountable for their actions. I actually am proud to say that I established what was probably the first drug court in the United States of America back in 1984. I was on the municipal court, and I quickly saw that alcohol-related offenses were the most difficult, problematic area that we in the municipal court were facing, and we really weren't doing much about it. So we started to screen out first offender DUIs for alcoholics. I didn't call them that, it smacked of name calling. I called them high-risk problem drinkers, but they knew what I meant. So we put them on a program that would take them off alcohol. And I enforced it. I never make idle threats as a judge. You even eat rum cake, as I would tell them, and it's called to my attention, I'll put you in jail. And after a while, they'd learn to believe me. We were successful in taking 65% of these alcoholics off alcohol. We replaced drinking drivers with sober drivers, and I am proud of that. But then I realized, hey, alcohol does not have to be illegal in order to hold people accountable for their actions, in order to bring the problem users into our court system. I was on a panel. I'm not going to put Chief Pazin on the spot here, but you know what we mean. But I was on a panel with the chief of police of Palm Springs several years ago, and I asked him, said, Chief, how many sworn officers do you have? And he said, I can't remember, 50, something like that. It was a fairly small police force. Okay. Chief, of those 50 officers, how many are involved in drug interdiction? Thought for a moment, he said about 2.5. I said, okay. Chief, how many of your sworn officers are involved in burglary details? And he said, none. We don't have the money. I thought to myself, you can't imagine, first of all, how much resources it takes to have an undercover sting drug operation. Chief, the sheriff will tell you, both sheriffs will tell you, it takes a lot of resources. It's dangerous. You've got to back them up. Then they all go back to the sheriff's office and they print out their reports. Then they'll come to my court and they'll testify and all the rest. It takes a lot of resources. How much benefit could we do if, in fact, we would use those resources for burglary? Sting operations on burglary for car or house. We don't do that today because we don't have the resources. So understand this. Every time we get tough with regard to nonviolent drug offenses, we get soft with regard to everything else because we only have so many resources. Hold people accountable for what they do, not what they put into their bodies. I am convinced, yes, marijuana usage, if AB 390 were to be passed, marijuana usage for adults would increase. I don't have any question in my mind. It's no longer illegal. The price has to be reduced, probably at least by half below street value, to knock the illegal sellers out of business. The only way you can do it is to take away their profits, to take away their customers. It's still illegal for them to be involved in this. We'll undercut their profit. We will take away 60% of the money coming into the illegal Mexican drug cartels today. 60% of that is because of marijuana. Are you worried about the violence coming across the border into our country? If you're not, you should be. It's basically here. The only way we will beat that is to undercut their profit margin. And then we will start experiencing what I call the Netherlands effect. In the Netherlands, anybody 16 years of age or older can go to a coffee shop and buy coffee, tea, sandwiches, and marijuana and hashish. Okay? The police are instructed in writing, as long as people stay within very well-known general guidelines, not to arrest you, to leave you alone. And you know what happens? The Minister of Health of Holland held a press conference saying, we only have half the marijuana usage in our country per capita as you do in the United States of America. And remember this, 16 years of age or older, if you want to, you can go to a coffee shop and buy marijuana. Half the marijuana consumption per capita, both for adults and for teenagers. And the Minister of Health explained why. You know what he said? We have succeeded in making pot boring. There's a message there. Because we glamorize it by making it illegal, and we also have a profit motive. The profit motive is one thing, but we are today putting our children in harm's way. We're doing this whole program of drug prohibition to protect our children. I understand that, and I ratify it. The grim joke is, though, we're putting our children in harm's way because of drug prohibition. The first thing we've already discussed, it's easier for our children to get any form of illicit drug if they want to than it is alcohol. It's fully available. But number two, we have adult drug dealers in our society today who are recruiting our children. Ask yourself the question, how much risk-taking can I buy as an adult drug dealer from a 15-year-old child for $50 in cash? And the answer is quite a bit. As a result, we have these adult drug dealers recruiting as many kids as they want. They use them for gophers, they use them as lookouts, they use them as couriers, whatever. Why do they do that? Piece of cake, more money. And then, as night follows day, the adults, as soon as the reliability of our children is established, will trust them to go out and sell small amounts of drugs in the communities. Why would they do such a thing? And the answer to that is, of course, the same. Money. Ask yourself this question. If you have a 15, 16-year-old boy or girl selling drugs in the communities, who is he or she going to sell to? Us? No. They're going to be selling these drugs to their 15, 16, 14-year-old peers, thus recruiting more children to a lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling. I have seen this in juvenile court. It happens all of the time, and it's not caused by drugs. It's caused by drug money. And we can beat that. So these are things that we simply must allow ourselves to discuss. I'm really running out of time. I have some forms here. I'm here, by the way, I belong to an organization called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Former Chief of Police of Seattle, Norm Stamper, is a part of this. Lots and lots of undercover officers, former police officers, sheriffs, judges, politicians, etc. There are some forms, some brochures in the back. Please just grab one. But there's also some form here. There is a drug policy resolution that I am proud to have been one of the original signers. It came out of Stanford University at the Hoover Institute, 1993. Some of the original signers were Milton Friedman, brightest person I've ever spoken to, wonderful man. Milton Friedman, George Shultz, nobody's liberal. Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan as president has signed our resolution saying there's got to be a better way. Let's investigate the possibility of change. They have also, by the way, endorsed my books, and I'm deeply proud to say, as well as Walter Cronkite. And if you can bring those three in the same political bargain, you're doing okay. We have some of these forms in the back there. Please look at them. Please take them. Please sign them. It does not say we should legalize anything. I don't want to legalize anything. I want to regulate and control them for adults. I do not want them to be advertised. I do not want them to be glamorized. But if you are going to use them, at least know what you're putting into your body. Remember, when we had alcohol prohibition, one of the substantial problems was what I call bathtub gin. You know, you didn't know if there were impurities in this stuff. It would attack your nervous system, and that is something we can control. Bring people closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of making them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. And as a true libertarian, I would tell you, the government has as much right to control what I put into my body when it comes down to it as they do what I put into my mind. When it comes down to it, as an adult, it's none of their business. But they do have a right to control our actions. Why? Because if you're going to drive a motor vehicle impaired by, again, any of these drugs, they're putting our safety at risk now. That's a legitimate criminal justice function. Let's look at that. And then we also have a magazine article from Time magazine. Get a copy of it because Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001. And this is a study showing you that they are doing just fine, thank you very much. They have taken the criminal element out to a major degree. They're making progress. Drug usage did not go up, etc., etc. Let's open our eyes to these things. I am going to leave you with a story, and I'm only leaving myself a few minutes for questions, and I know you have some. But the story is that there was a man, very end of his life, he was on his deathbed, and he called his wife to his side and said, "Well, dear, I know I'm not long for this earth, but before I leave you, I just have to get something off my chest. For numbers of years now, I've been having an affair with such and such a woman, lived across the street. I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but I think you have a right to hear this and hear it from me." She looked at him. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "That's okay. I know. That's why I poisoned you." Well, in such a similar way, we are poisoning ourselves by our choice of drug policy here. It does not have to be that way. We can only get better from here. Please get a copy of the resolution. Look at it. Think about it. I'm not asking you to do anything hurriedly. The more you think about it, the more you will agree we have to change this approach, if only for our children. Sign it, send it in to that fax number. Thank you for your involvement. I would like to leave some questions, and I do have a copy of my book here too, because the more you think about this, the more you really need to channel these thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
How would you address the argument that using marijuana is a gateway to other drugs?
Good for you. That is a popular conception, that it is a gateway, a stepping stone, as it were. If you use marijuana, you'll go on and use something else. It is simply not true. You will see that 85% of everybody in the country that uses marijuana uses only marijuana. They do not go on to use other drugs. However, you will understand that pretty much everybody that uses cocaine, methamphetamine, whatever, used marijuana on the way. I understand that. But before that, they used alcohol. Before that, they used tobacco. You could really take it back to mother's milk if you wanted to. It's pretty much been explored and simply decimated. It just isn't the case. Yes, sir.
I'm very uncomfortable when you compare alcohol and say that prohibition sort of solved our alcohol problem.
No, sir.
136 people died in automobile accidents in Fresno County last year. Half of them were drunk.
Yes.
30 people committed suicide.
Yes.
Half of them were drunk. Half the people who drowned, half the people who died in fires, they're all drunk.
Yes.
We have not solved the alcohol problem. We have hidden it.
Please.
And that doesn't even address
Please.
the people who die of acute chronic alcoholism.
Please. I have never said we have solved the alcohol problem. We clearly have not. Alcohol is a dangerous, sometimes addicting drug. It happens that pretty much every day after work I use it, and by and large I use it responsibly. But let me ask you a question, because it's clear, I've already said we're facing two substantial problems. One is drug problems, and that includes alcohol. The other is drug money problems. I agree alcohol is dangerous. How many of you here believe that we should try to make it better by making it illegal again? How many? Okay, I have one hand. Cigarettes, easily the biggest killer of any mind-altering, sometimes addicting substance in our society. 400 or so thousand people each year in our country alone die because they themselves smoke cigarettes. If the government really wanted to make illegal care for our safety and medical health, they would make cigarettes illegal. How many of you believe that the government should make cigarettes illegal? Well, some. You want to bring Al Capone into the cigarette distribution business. So you're right. It's a huge problem. I do not minimize it. It would only compound it by making it illegal again.
Cigarette use does not jeopardize the rest of it, but alcohol use does.
I agree. But I think I've answered your question. I do not at all condone using any of these drugs. One more question? No, we don't. Oh, all right, our time is up.
I apologize, Judge.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Please stay here.